The folder hit the kitchen table so hard the coffee cups rattled. "You think a piece of paper is going to take a house I've owned for 6 years?" Roy snapped, shoving it back across the wood toward her. "Get out of my house, Delaney." "It's not your house, Roy." She didn't move. "And it's not just a piece of paper. It's the truth. And by the time I'm done, a judge is going to read it out loud in a courtroom." He laughed, but it came out thin, like something with the air let out of it. Neither one of them knew yet that in 4 months, one of them would be sleeping in a jail cell and the other would be standing in the front yard of the farm her family had worked for 4 generations, finally holding the deed with her own name on it. But that's the ending. Let's back up. The farm sat on 210 acres outside a small town in central Ohio, the kind of place where the mailboxes had names painted on them, and everybody at the diner knew whose truck was whose. Earl Croft had grown up on that land, and so had his father before him, and his father before that. Earl had 2 kids, Delaney and her younger brother Garrett, and one younger brother of his own, Roy, who'd left the farm at 19 to chase something shinier in the city and came back 30 years later with a lot of stories and not much else. Earl never held that against him. Family was family. When Earl got the pancreatic cancer diagnosis at 61, doctors gave him 8 months. He made it 5. In those 5 months, Earl did what a lot of dying men do. He tried to get his affairs in order. He'd had a will drawn up years earlier, notarized and everything, splitting the farm equally between Delaney and Garrett. Roy knew about that will. Everybody knew about that will. It had been talked about at Thanksgiving more than once, half joking, half not. "You kids are going to have to figure out who gets the tractor." But when Earl's health started sliding fast, he asked Roy to help him handle some paperwork, since Roy had, by his own account, a good head for business. Delaney was working nights as a hospital administrator 2 hours away, and Garrett was overseas with the Army at the time, so neither of them was in the room for most of what happened in those final weeks. Roy made sure of that. He drove Earl to appointments, he sat in on calls with the estate attorney, and somewhere in that blur of morphine and fatigue, a new deed got drawn up. One that quietly transferred the entire farm, all 210 acres, solely into Roy's name. Earl died on a Tuesday morning in March, with Delaney holding one hand and a hospice nurse checking his pulse on the other side of the bed. Garrett made it home 2 days before in his dress uniform, having flown back on emergency leave. The funeral was small. The reading of the paperwork happened 4 days after that in Roy's cramped little rental apartment in town because, he said, it's easier with fewer people around. He sat them both down at his kitchen table, the same table where, years later, Delaney would slam a folder down and end everything. "Your dad changed some things near the end," Roy told them, sliding a stack of papers across. "This was his final wish. He wanted the farm to stay in one set of hands, not split up, not fought over. He asked me to hold on to it, keep it together, for the family." Delaney remembers staring at the signature at the bottom of the deed. It looked like her father's handwriting, mostly, a little shakier than usual. She chalked that up to the medication. "He wanted it going to us," Garrett said slowly. "That's what the will said." "The will was old," Roy said. "This is what he wanted at the end. I know it's hard to hear, but I was there, Garrett. I was there every single day. Were you?" That last line did exactly what it was supposed to do. Garrett had spent the last year of his father's life on a base overseas, and the guilt of that sat on him like a stone. He didn't argue. Delaney, exhausted and grieving and 28 years old, didn't argue either. "Okay," she said quietly. "If that's what Dad wanted." Roy nodded, like a man accepting a burden nobly. "I'll take care of everything. You two don't worry about a thing." That was the first payoff of the setup. The forged deed, delivered wrapped in grief and guilt, swallowed whole by 2 kids who trusted their uncle because their father had trusted him first. For the first year, nothing much seemed to change. Roy kept the farmhouse standing, kept a few cows around for show, and told anyone who asked that he was just trying to honor Earl's wishes. Delaney visited on holidays. Garrett, once he was discharged, moved back into a little house he was renting 15 minutes away and helped out on weekends, mending fences, fixing the tractor Roy never learned to drive right. Then the moving trucks started showing up. First, it was a 110-acre parcel on the east side sold to a development company for a number that made Delaney's stomach turn when she heard about it secondhand from a neighbor. Roy told her it was just the back 40, nothing anybody was using anyway. Then it was the pond parcel. 12 acres with a stocked pond her grandfather had dug by hand in 1958, sold to a hunting outfit. Then, on a Sunday afternoon, 18 months after Earl's funeral, Delaney got a call from her Aunt Lorraine, no relation by blood, just Roy's wife, who Delaney had always liked, asking in a small, embarrassed voice if Delaney knew anything about an eviction notice. "An eviction notice for who?" Delaney asked. "For your cousin Cody and his mother. They've been living in the old homestead since your grandpa passed, hon. Roy's saying he's got a buyer for the house itself now." Delaney's grandmother's sister, an elderly woman named Marlene, everyone just called Aunt Marlene, had lived in the original homestead on that land for over 30 years, along with her grandson Cody, who helped tend what was left of the property. Roy served them a 30-day notice through a property management company, cold as a bank letter, no personal call, nothing. That was the second real escalation. Delaney drove out there the next weekend and found Cody loading boxes into a pickup truck in the driveway, Aunt Marlene sitting on the porch steps with her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a bus that wasn't coming. "He said it's his land now," Cody told her, not meeting her eyes. "Said we've had a good run." "This is insane," Delaney said. "This was Grandpa's house before it was anybody's." "Take it up with your uncle," Cody said. "I already tried." She did take it up with Roy. He met her on his own front porch this time, arms crossed, sunglasses pushed up on his head, even though it was overcast. "I'm doing what's best for the family long term," he said. "That house needs work I can't justify pouring money into. The land's worth more than the memory, Delaney. You'll understand that when you're older." Dad would never have wanted Aunt Marlene thrown out of her own house. "Your dad," Roy said, voice sharpening, "isn't here to have an opinion anymore. I am." She left that conversation rattled, but still, she didn't fully suspect. Grief does strange things to a person's ability to see clearly. It would take one more year and one dusty cardboard box in her father's old storage unit before the whole picture cracked open. It happened on an ordinary Saturday in October. Delaney had finally gotten around to cleaning out a 10 by 10 storage unit her father had rented years before he got sick, full of old tax records, photo albums, a broken record player nobody could bear to throw out. She was going through a banker's box of yellowed folders when she found a manila envelope stamped with a notary seal, tucked behind a stack of old property tax bills. Inside was a copy of her father's original will, the one everyone had talked about at Thanksgiving, the one that split the farm equally between her and Garrett. Notarized, dated, witnessed by two names she didn't recognize. Nothing about keeping the farm together in one set of hands, nothing about Roy at all, except a single line naming him as backup executor only if both children were deceased. Her hands actually shook holding it. She called Garrett that same night. "I found Dad's real will," she said. "The one from before. It doesn't say anything about Roy getting the farm. It names us, both of us, equal shares." There was a long silence on the line. "Are you sure it's not just an old draft?" "It's notarized, Garrett. It's dated 2 years before he died. Nothing about this ever got revoked as far as I can find." "So what does that mean?" "It means," she said slowly, "that the deed Roy showed us, the one he said was Dad's final wish, might not be real." That was the moment the story turned. Not a scream, not a scene. Just two siblings on a phone call, staring down the realization that the uncle they'd trusted with their grief might have robbed them blind. Delaney didn't confront Roy right away. She was smarter than that. Instead, she spent the next several weeks quietly pulling every document she could get her hands on. The recorded deed at the county courthouse, copies of the sale records for the parcels Roy had sold off, even old photographs of her father's handwriting from birthday cards and grocery lists, anything with his signature on it. Then she hired a forensic document examiner named Dr. Selwyn Marsh, a soft-spoken man in his 60s who'd spent 30 years testifying in fraud cases up and down the state. She sat across from him in his cramped office, the deed and a folder of comparison signatures spread between them. Your father's signature has a very consistent slant, Selwyn told her, tapping a magnifying loupe against an old grocery list receipt. Left to right, moderate pressure, a distinctive loop on the capital E. This signature, he tapped the deed, starts with the same slant, but the pressure's inconsistent. And look here at the crossbar on the T in Croft. It's retraced. Somebody went back over the stroke. People don't do that with their own handwriting. Forgers do that when they're copying a signature they don't fully trust themselves to nail in one pass. Can you prove it in court? Delaney asked. I can testify to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that this signature is inconsistent with your father's known handwriting samples and consistent with simulation. He looked up at her. In plain English? Yes, I can prove somebody faked this. She felt something crack open in her chest. Relief and rage in the same breath. She hired a probate attorney next, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Lyle Hutchins, who'd handled estate disputes for over 20 years. When she laid the whole thing out for him, the original will, the forged deed, the sold parcels, the eviction of an elderly woman from her own home, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. This isn't just a bad faith executor situation, Lyle said. If everything you're telling me holds up, this is forgery. This is fraud. This could be criminal, not just civil. I want the farm back, Delaney said. What's left of it anyway, and I want him to answer for what he did to Aunt Marlene and Cody. Then we file in probate court to void the deed, and we send a copy of everything to the district attorney's office at the same time. Let both hammers fall. That was the plan that led 4 months later to that kitchen table confrontation, the one at the very start of this story. Delaney had gone to see Roy one last time, folder in hand, not because she needed his permission for anything, but because some part of her still wanted to look him in the eye and ask why. You lied to us at the worst moment of our lives, she said, standing in his kitchen while he sat there, arms crossed, refusing to touch the folder. You used Dad's death to steal from his own kids. I kept this family together, Roy said. You have no idea what it takes to run 200 acres. I made it profitable. I gave your father's legacy a future. You sold his legacy off in pieces to buy yourself a boat, Roy. I've seen the bank records. I've seen the truck payments, the boat payments, the trip to Cancun 3 months after you evicted a 79-year-old woman from her own porch. His jaw tightened. That will your father supposedly signed for me, the one you're so sure about. Good luck proving anything. It's been years. It's already proven, Delaney said and set the report on top of the folder. Forensic document examiner says the signature's a forgery. Notarized copy of Dad's real will names me and Garrett as equal heirs, dated 2 years before he died, never revoked. County recorder has your filing on record with a notary stamp from a notary who, funny thing, says she has no memory of ever meeting my father, and no log entry for that date in her notary journal. For the first time, something flickered across Roy's face that wasn't anger. It was closer to fear. Get out of my house, he said again, quieter this time. It's not your house, Delaney said, and it's not going to be for much longer. The probate hearing took place 5 weeks later in a county courthouse that still had the same water-stained ceiling tiles Delaney remembered from jury duty years before. Roy showed up in a suit that looked a size too tight, hired a lawyer who kept objecting to things that weren't objectionable, and sat rigid the entire time Selwyn took the stand. In my professional opinion, Selwyn told the judge, the signature on this deed exhibits multiple hallmark indicators of forgery, inconsistent pressure, unnatural pen lifts, and retracing consistent with simulation rather than genuine execution. I would put my professional certainty at above 95% that this is not an authentic signature. The notary public testified next, visibly uncomfortable, admitting under oath that her notary journal had no record of the transaction and that while her stamp appeared on the document, she had no memory of the date, the client, or of her notarizing anything for Earl. Lyle walked the judge through the timeline, the original notarized will, dated and witnessed years before Earl's death, naming Delaney and Garrett as equal heirs. The sudden appearance of a new deed during Earl's final medicated weeks, drafted with Roy's help and benefiting Roy exclusively, the sale of 122 acres within 18 months of Earl's death, the eviction of 2 family members from the homestead. And finally, financial records showing large deposits from those land sales feeding directly into Roy's purchase of a boat, a truck, and a down payment on a lake house 2 counties over. Roy's attorney tried to argue that Earl could have simply changed his mind near the end of his life, that dying men revise their wishes all the time. Then where, the judge asked, looking over her glasses, is any record of Mr. Croft consulting his original estate attorney about that change? Any note in his medical file about discussing new estate plans? Any witness besides the one person who benefits from this document? There wasn't one. There never had been. The judge didn't take long. She voided the fraudulent deed, restored the estate to the terms of the original will, and ordered the farm, what remained of it, split equally between Delaney and Garrett, as their father had actually intended. She also referred the entire matter to the district attorney's office for criminal review, on top of the fraud complaint Lyle had already filed. Roy was charged with forgery, fraud, and criminal exploitation of a vulnerable adult, tied to how he'd manipulated Earl's declining medical state to push the fake deed through. It took another 8 months for the criminal case to wind through the courts, but by then his life had already started coming apart at the seams. The civil judgment required him to return the proceeds from every parcel he'd illegally sold, over $340,000, most of which he'd already spent. That meant the boat went first, repossessed off its trailer in his own driveway while a neighbor watched from across the street. Then the truck. Then, 6 weeks after the criminal trial started, the lake house, which had never actually been paid off. It went into foreclosure the same month a jury found him guilty on 2 of the 3 counts. He was sentenced to 3 years in state prison, with the judge noting specifically that his crime hadn't just been financial. It had been a betrayal of a dying man's trust and his grieving children's grief, used as a weapon. Lorraine filed for divorce 4 months after the sentencing. She sent Delaney a short, awkward text that just said, "I'm so sorry, I didn't know. I should have asked more questions. I hope you and Garrett can build what he broke." Delaney didn't hold it against her. Lorraine hadn't stolen anything. As for the farm, what was left after the sold parcels, Delaney and Garrett couldn't get those 122 acres back. That land belonged to new owners now, developers and hunting outfits who'd bought it in good faith and had no idea it had been fraudulently sold in the first place. But the remaining 88 acres, including the homestead itself, came back into the family fully and free of any claim from Roy. The first thing Delaney and Garrett did was call Aunt Marlene. "You don't have to move anywhere," Delaney told her over the phone, voice cracking a little. "The house is yours again. It always should have been." Marlene cried on the phone for almost a full minute before she could say anything back. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you, sweetheart. Both of you." Cody moved back in with her that same month and started fixing up the porch steps that had sagged for years under Roy's ownership. Garrett took over managing the cattle again, the way their father once had. Delaney kept her hospital job, but started coming out most weekends, sitting on that same porch some evenings, looking out over land that had almost slipped away for good. She still has the notarized will framed on her wall now, right next to a photo of her father standing in front of the old barn, arms crossed, squinting into the sun the way he always did. Some people keep trophies of the fights they win. She kept the piece of paper that proved she was telling the truth all along. If you had a relative like Roy, somebody who used grief as cover to take something that was never theirs, tell us what happened in the comments. And if you think Delaney did the right thing digging until she found the truth, hit like, subscribe, and let us know what you would have done in her shoes.